Today's lesson, we're going to focus our attention on beneficiaries. One of the nice things about insurance company products, is that you can actually designate someone to receive your money if you should die prematurely or whenever you pass away. And unlike many of the products that you may have with other organizations, mutual funds, stocks, bonds, and all that kind of stuff there, basically all insurance products fall under what we call the Uniform Insurance Act, which then basically means that you can in fact have a beneficiary who will receive your funds in the event that you pass away. Now, there are a number of different kinds of beneficiaries. So we need to look at all of them and remember that these are very, very important things to remember, because generally speaking, your consumer, your exam, all of these will, they're going to be asking you these kind of questions. The first one is what we call the estate. All of us have an estate of some sort. So if you named your estate as the beneficiary, then obviously, if you're going to be insured for $500,000, your estate received a check for $500,000. Remember that the death benefit is obviously tax-free and everything. However, the moment it enters your estate, it could be subject to creditors. It could be subject to taxation. In other words, it could be subject to attack, you might say, from the government. It could be subject to attack from your creditors. So even though you may have the best of intentions to actually put money into the estate for liquidity purposes, in other words, to pay those taxes, to pay their capital gains taxes, any kind of taxes that may be involved, in other words, you want to provide liquidity, you got to remember that the moment you name your estate, and that it could inflate the value of your estate, causing you more tax grief. It could also be attacked by creditors. So it's not a preferred way of doing this. You're probably better off doing the next one. In other words, name one or more persons as beneficiaries. In other words, if you name an actual person as a beneficiary, you'll see that there's some protection there against taxation, against creditors, because money will actually go directly to the person and therefore bypass the estate. So the idea of naming a person or persons as your beneficiary is really that it bypasses the estate. So again, it will eliminate any tax implications and creditors and so on. There are basically three things you have to remember when you're naming a person or persons as a beneficiary. The first one is what we call a revocable beneficiary. A revocable beneficiary basically means that you, as the life insured, you as the owner of the plan, you can change the beneficiary anytime you want without notifying the actual beneficiaries themselves. In other words, the revocable beneficiary really has no rights under the contract. So therefore, you can go ahead, change beneficiaries. In fact, you can do whatever you like with your policy, because the revocable beneficiary really doesn't have any power at this point. So you can assign to the bank, you can cancel the plan, you can change beneficiaries, you can do anything you like, because there is no actual hold, you might say, on the plan. However, one to remember is the irrevocable beneficiary, the IR. In an irrevocable beneficiary, this individual does become a party to the contract. So in this case here, you really cannot change that beneficiary. You really cannot borrow money. You really cannot assign the policy. In other words, what you're really doing now is you're extending your powers over to a third person. In other words, your beneficiary. So if you are going to change beneficiaries, you have to notify that beneficiary has to give you permission to do so. If you're going to assign the policy to the bank, whatever it is you're going to do, the irrevocable beneficiary becomes a party to that contract. So you got to think very carefully before you name something as irrevocable, because it really ties your hands a great deal. A third thing to remember in regards to this particular area is what we call the preferred class. And again, this could be revocable, whatever, but the preferred class. In other words, if you leave your money to the preferred class, it will then be basically non-accessible to your creditors. In other words, it becomes creditor-proof. Now, who's the preferred class? The preferred class basically, as I've always described, sort of the trunk of the tree, you might say. In other words, it's your mother, it's your father, it's your spouse, it's your children, it's your grandchildren. It's not your friend, it's not your siblings, it's not anybody else, sort of the branches of the tree. It really is the trunk of the tree. So if you leave your money revocably, but you leave it as a preferred beneficiary, then what happens is that money will not be attacked under the creditor protection, basically. In other words, the preferred class has creditor protection. The non-preferred class, and again, being your brother, your sister, or your friend, your enemy, whatever the case may be, then they would be attacked. So it's very important to remember the protection that your monies will have under the preferred beneficiary. You can also name a class of persons. So, for example, instead of naming every single person every single time or whenever there's a change, you may say all my grandchildren, for example. It's a very common thing because you don't know how many grandchildren you're actually going to have, let's say, until when you die. So rather than every single time a new grandchild comes to the world, you have to change the beneficiary designation. So you may simply make a blanket statement and basically saying, I'm going to leave all my money to all my grandchildren. So that's sort of a class of persons. So it's a very, very effective way of leaving money. Another one, of course, is your business. This is very, very common where business people may, for example, purchase a policy on a key employee, for example. Okay, so they have a very important person who works for them, wants to make sure that that individual passes away. The company will be spared financially and everything. So you have a key employee type of situation. So that's a business situation. In a buy-sell type of thing, in other words, if you have a partnership, let's say, again, I buy on you, you buy on me, for example, to buy each other out in the event that somebody one of us should die and everything. So there's lots and lots of business purposes for beneficiaries as well. And the last one, of course, is trustees. Okay, you've got some of you may have clients, for example, that they have a child or a person or whatever who was unable to take care of themselves for various different reasons. They may be too young, they may have mental issues, they may have physical issues. So you can't really leave money to them because they're not going to be in a capacity to actually manage that particular money. So rather than leaving money to them, what you would do is set up a trust. That trust is on behalf of that particular individual. Money goes to that trust, and then, of course, the trust decides how the money is going to be invested and how the money is going to be dispersed and so on and so forth. So a very, very effective way of leaving money to people that really can't manage their own money, either because of they're too young or they have mental issues or physical issues and things of that nature there. Now, one thing to remember, very, very important, because, again, you could get asked on the exam, is what happens in the absence of a beneficiary. In other words, if there is no beneficiary, in other words, the beneficiary, in fact, has predeceased the actual life insured, where does the money go? So if, for example, it's myself and my spouse, and we are on the same plane, and I die, and I've got a $500,000 policy on my life, and my spouse is the beneficiary of that money, but unfortunately she died on that plane crash as well. The insurance company will say, is there a beneficiary? Yes, there is. It's the spouse. However, the spouse is also dead. So now what happens to that, to that money? That money then will be paid to my estate. In other words, it goes back to the insured's estate, and of course could be subject to taxation and to creditors. So in the absence of a beneficiary, what happens is the money actually goes right back to the insured's estate and could be subject to taxation, could be subject to creditors. So it's always a good idea to have what we call a contingent beneficiary, somebody that if the primary beneficiary passes away, then the secondary beneficiary, if you want to call it that, will take over. Otherwise, that money will be, in fact, not be paid to the spouse at all because that spouse is gone. It will actually go back to the insured's estate and therefore could be subject to that taxation that we were talking about and that creditor situation we were talking about earlier.